Welcome to the Writer Jerk Podcast. I am your host, James Kirst. I am the author of two books, Ghosts Are Assholes, published in 2018, and Magic Once Removed, published in 2020. Both books were published by World Castle Publishing, LLC. They are available in several places, including Amazon.com and JamesKirst.com/books, though the links will be provided in the description. I have written approximately 50 short stories, which are also available on JamesKirst.com. If you like any of them or have any constructive criticism, please leave me a comment. My novels mostly focus on paranormal mysteries, urban fantasy, and/or straightforward fantasy, but my short stories tend to gravitate toward horror, slice of life, fantasy, and comedy. Now that the obligatory plugs are out of the way, let's get on with the show. Did you like that? I'm thinking about making it the introduction to my show, at least in the short term for the miniature episodes that I plan to release. You heard right. The name of the podcast is Writer Jerk, or at least that's the name I'm planning on using. So you may be wondering, why am I planning on calling the podcast that? A while back, I created an Instagram account that I don't even use anymore called Writer JRK. Named so because I am a writer and my initials are JRK, James Roman Kirst. Somebody noticed it looked kind of like Writer Jerk, and though he said it was an unfortunate mistake, I embraced it. I think it's catchy, or at least easily memorable, and would be good for marketing purposes, search engine optimization, that sort of thing. I'm planning on releasing a series of 15-minute or so miniature test podcasts to gauge the waters to see if there's any interest in this kind of thing. I'm not expecting gigantic numbers, but if a few people leave some comments, then I'll feel at least like there's some interest, and I'll probably continue making them if there's at least a little bit of interest in these things. I have to admit, these first few sets of podcasts, especially like this one, will probably be a little bit rough. So please forgive me if I say whatever, a little too much and have too many awkward pauses or anything of that nature, or repeat myself, which I will constantly, probably even after this thing becomes a big deal and everyone's listening to my podcast constantly. This is just something I've been meaning to do for a while, so I thought I'd just dive right in and give it a shot. And, I can hear you. I know what you're thinking. From beyond the ether, beyond the computer screen, I can still hear what you're saying right now. There are millions of podcasts, and yours will be just another in an overly abundant sea of podcasts. Are you an idiot? I mean, what are you doing? This is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. And for that, I have to say, I don't like your attitude, mister, first of all. And second of all, the reason why I'm making this podcast is because I love talking about stories of all kinds, whether they be books, short stories, movies, video games, any sort of storytelling medium. I love to talk about it. And I think it would also be interesting to get an author's view of the writer's process, a behind-the-scenes look, if you will, and just sort of what goes through at least one author's mind as he's trying to write a story. I think I can provide a lot of insight into that, and those kind of things. And moreover, if nothing else, I love to hear myself speak. One of the things I've also noticed is that I think these days people want to get to know the author. It's kind of odd because I would rather the work speak for itself, but I think people, for whatever reason, want to get to know the man behind or the woman behind the story. I'm not sure I understand that too much. I mean, to a point I do. The one example people often use is Hitler of all people was an artist, of a painter, but we're not going to at any point discuss the merits of his work of art for obvious reasons. Similarly, if Pol Pot, if it's discovered that he wrote a series of romance novels, I am not going to read them at any time soon. And, at that point, separating the artist from the art would be all but impossible. But unless it's that extreme, I think the work should be judged for its own merit. I just think these days that people, for the most part, have the opposite view. They want to know the author first, and then if they like the author, they can read the story, or at least they'll be more interested in reading the story. I don't know if that's true or not. I kind of got that impression from the cursory research that I did about marketing. One of the things with Instagram, and this is just one article, so the sample size is of one, but I noticed that the Instagram accounts, the article was talking about them saying to the effect, Isn't it amazing? They do everything but talk about writing. They talk about, all the things that they do in their life outside of the books. And isn't that amazing? And to me, it's like, well, that's nice. I am glad that they have a life. I'm glad that they can do things outside of writing. But at the same time, if I'm following an author, I'm kind of more curious about the work that they've done in terms of storytelling or their novels or things that are relevant to their stories that they're creating than what they had for breakfast, whether they're climbing mountains. Like I said, I may be in the minority in that camp, and I may be wrong. Like I said, it was one article. I might be just projecting my own thoughts and feelings towards, my own cynicism there. That's just something that I think, people want to know. They want to know the author a little bit more. That's the impression that I've been getting. So I'm hoping that these podcasts will allow people to get to know me a little bit better. Now, granted, similar to my website, I am kind of trying to keep these podcasts, for lack of a better term, clean. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when I'm talking about my website, jameskurtz.com, I'm not making blog posts outside of short stories or posts related to my novels, because I don't want to clog it up with general blog posts, things that, what I had for breakfast or things of that nature, or even like anything that's not related to stories, because I really do want my work to stand for its own. I don't want people to go to jameskurtz.com and expect to find basically diary posts. I want people to go there knowing, okay, I'm going to get something relevant to his novels, or relevant as far as short stories, like actual short stories. Maybe occasionally I write an essay about a short story, or maybe about a review of a novel or something like that. I could kind of branch out in that way, but I'm not really planning on ever making it like a diary site or a journal site or anything like that. And so that's where I'm getting at with the podcast, is that the podcast would give me a little bit more leeway to maybe talk a little bit more about myself. Now, the podcast will be a little bit more focused still. I mean, it wouldn't just be me talking about things off the top of my head. I would have a topic, and I would actually try to stick with the topic. But I think just through general discussions that I have with either the audience, or one of the things I'm hoping to have is like a co-host at some point. And I'm hoping that through, the discussions that I have with my audience, with my co-host, with people in general, they'll start to get to know me a little bit better. And if it is true, if my cynical musing is true, that people want to get to know the author a little bit more before they actually read his or her stories, maybe they'll be more inclined to read my short stories, my novels, and anything else that I write. So, what do I have planned for this podcast should there be any interest? I am thinking that maybe this podcast would be extended to 30 minutes, maybe even an hour. After an hour, it starts to get a little bit too long for most audiences. I think somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour is usually that sort of sweet spot where it doesn't feel too short, but it doesn't feel too long. It wouldn't be daily, most likely. I doubt I could do this daily. And from what I understand, a daily podcast is basically a full-time job. I think even if you start doing it weekly or bi-weekly, it's still a little difficult. Monthly is plausible, but it's also difficult to grow an audience that when you're doing a monthly podcast. And, just in terms of podcasting versus writing novels and short stories, I do kind of want to focus on writing novels and short stories, and I don't want the podcast to take up too much of my time. At the same time, I think a podcast is something that I can enjoy at the same level or something similar as far as like writing, like on the same level, on the same plane. They could be equivalent to each other. So it's something I'm going to need to consider. And, frankly speaking, it depends on how many topics I can have or think of related to writing. Now, it'd be great to do a daily podcast, for example, but how often would I really be able to think of a topic every day? Now, is it possible? Sure, there's actually a ton to talk about with writing and the writing process, and especially if I start expanding to movies and talking about what other people have done, and that'd be great. Except for, it's still, like I said, then it's the full-time job thing where it's like, well, okay, do I need to read a story? How many novels do I read? Can I read in a week? We'll see. That's something I'm thinking about in the far future, because right now I just want to know if anybody even cares that I'm trying to do these mini casts. And if the answer is no, well, this might be it. So we'll see. I think a co-host would be able to provide a lot. I think it would be somebody that I could talk to. We could talk about the topics on hand. A co-host could, for example, provide questions that I might not have thought about. This will be more noticeable when in my other podcasts when I talk about the books and the novels that I've written, just a little bit behind the scenes. I have come up with some discussion that I think you'll find interesting, but I think you might also have other questions that I'm not even considering right now. And a co-host might be able to speak up and say, hey, why did you write this part? Or why did you think of this part? And, that kind of thing. Or why didn't you mention this in the story? So I think that's what a co-host could provide. One of the things, if you are interested in being a co-host, I'm afraid I won't allow you to swear for the most part. I know this kind of like the Angels in the Outfield movie from '94, where, one of the players sarcastically says, well, that eliminates all speech for most of the team. So if you are kind of that individual where you curse all the time, I'm afraid it wouldn't work out as my co-host. I'm trying to keep this relatively family-friendly, and I just kind of think that if I'm going to have a writing-themed podcast, it doesn't really speak well of either of our vocabularies if all we do is curse at each other all the time. I understand we're all human beings, and I do the same as everyone else. Sometimes we let something slip, and if that happens, that's not the end of the world. I would censor it out. But otherwise, it wouldn't really make me upset or anything. But if you're swearing all the time, all of a sudden, I might have to speak to you about that. Hopefully, though, since I'm laying out that groundwork right now, that won't become an issue. And that's also if there's any interest at all in being a co-host. I mean, this could be like discussing lottery winnings. What am I going to spend it on if I win the lottery? Well, it's great to have dreams, but we'll see if they come into fruition. One of the other things that a co-host would have to provide is sort of a laser focus on the topic at hand. For example, if we talk about a movie, we're going to focus on the movie story. We're not going to talk about what we had for breakfast, what we had for lunch, or anything like that. One of the other things, too, is that we won't be talking about the music or the visuals if it's like a movie, for example. Similarly, if we talk about video games, we're not going to be talking about the gameplay. Everything will be focused on the story. I understand that every now and again we might have some deviations. That's fine. If we for a minute or two talk about something else but the topic, that would be, I'm probably not going to edit it out or anything like that. One of the things too is that as far as the laser focus on a topic, is that if what we're discussing, let's say in your personal life, is somehow relevant to the story or the topic on hand, then that would be fine. For example, if we were talking about a movie in the hospital and you worked as a nurse for several years and you want to relate how that makes the story realistic in your mind because it's like they're dealing with the things I had to deal with as a nurse. Perfect. That would be perfect to talk about even if, so your life experience would be relevant to the story. But if you're saying like, oh yeah, yesterday I went to the hospital and then I went to this and then I did this, then I did this, and you started to veer off from the topic, I'll do my best to keep things focused, but it would be better if we both kept focused. And don't get me wrong, I'll probably be off topic as well. That will probably do it for this podcast. And one other thing I want to mention. What I would like to do, as far as marketing and where this thing would go is like I'd like to do streams where I do Q&A sessions with people about my literary works, short stories, thoughts on certain short stories, novels, that sort of thing. A place where we could chill out and relax. It's a funny thing. I'm not really a big fan of Instagram or anything, but streams seem fun. Streams seem like something I would really enjoy, where people just throw questions at me and I'd answer them, like in a casual environment. That's a dream of mine. We'll see if it comes to fruition. Thank you for listening. That's it for now. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and a comment. If you didn't enjoy, please leave a like and a comment anyway. All right, I'm kidding on that one. But please let me know why you didn't enjoy or what you did enjoy and what could be better. Until next time, this has been James Kurtz, the Righty Jerk, now signing off.